The sound of rain touched the window like 1,000 quiet memories returning home. The hospital room was dimly lit, its silence broken only by the rhythmic beep of a monitor that matched the fading heartbeat of time. Aisha sat beside Hamza, her hand gently resting on his. His fingers were still warm, yet motionless, as if they were waiting for a final word that had never been spoken. Her eyes, tired and swollen from endless nights, looked at him the way one looks at the moon after a storm, fragile, hopeful, and afraid to lose its light again. Outside, the rain fell harder, tracing lines down the glass, just like the tears she refused to let fall. "You always said rain reminds you of peace," she whispered softly, her voice trembling. "But tonight, it only reminds me of how alone peace feels without you." She leaned back on the chair, her mind drifting through the past, the laughter, the teasing, the long walks under the same rain that now surrounded them both. There was a time when Aisha and Hamza's world was nothing but color and sound, a canvas of dreams painted with laughter. They met in college, she, the quiet artist with eyes that always seemed to be sketching stories. He, the boy who believed that even silence could sing. He would often say, "Aisha, you don't have to speak for me to understand you. Your eyes tell me everything." And she would blush, pretending not to hear him. Life was simple, beautiful, and filled with moments that felt infinite. Until that night, the night that changed everything. It had been raining then, too. Hamza was driving home after surprising Aisha with her favorite flowers. She still remembered his last message that night. "Stay awake, I'll call you in 10. But the call never came. Instead, a stranger's voice had echoed through the phone, trembling, urgent, and cold. "There's been an accident." The world had stopped moving after that. Hours later, she found herself standing in the hospital corridor, her hands shaking, her mind refusing to believe. Hamza had survived, but his consciousness hadn't. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and the man who once filled her world with laughter now lay trapped inside a silence she couldn't break. Aisha visited him every day. She spoke to him about everything, her day, her dreams, her fears, hoping that somewhere behind that still face, he could hear her. The doctors called it a miracle that he was still breathing. She called it love refusing to die. She refused to give up on him because she believed in the promises they made, to grow old together, to never say goodbye, to always write letters to each other even when words failed. One evening, as she cleaned his bedside table, her eyes fell on a small bag of his belongings, his watch, his wallet, and his old phone, the one she hadn't seen since the accident. Something inside her urged her to pick it up. The battery was dead, but she couldn't ignore the sudden wave of emotions it brought. It was as if that phone held a part of him that the world had forgotten. She took it home that night. Later, in her room, under the soft light of her bedside lamp, Aisha plugged in the phone. As it turned on, the familiar wallpaper appeared, a picture of them both at the lakeside, smiling at each other as if the world could never hurt them. Her eyes filled with tears. Slowly, she opened his messages. There were unread texts from friends, missed calls, random notes. But one thing caught her eye, a message saved as a draft. It was titled simply, "Aisha." Her heart skipped a beat. With trembling fingers, she opened it. The message began. Asterisk, if you're reading this, it means I never got to tell you what my heart carried every day. You once asked me why I loved rain so much. It's because every drop feels like a heartbeat, unpredictable, alive, and fleeting. That's how I've loved you, without knowing how long I'll have you, but with the certainty that even if time stops, my love won't. Asterisk. Her eyes blurred with tears as she scrolled down. Asterisk, there's something I never told you. The day before the accident, I met someone, a stranger who told me that when you love someone, you should never hide anything from them. I wanted to tell you something that night. Not a secret, but a truth I had buried. I was going to propose to you, Aisha. The ring was in my pocket. I never got the chance to ask, but I want you to know, even in my silence, I am still saying your name. Asterisk. Aisha couldn't breathe. The phone trembled in her hand. That unsent message felt like a heartbeat echoing from a world between life and death. She pressed the screen to her chest, her tears falling freely now. "You never had to send it," she whispered. "I already knew." The next morning, Aisha returned to the hospital. The nurse smiled weakly, whispering, "He's still the same." But something in Aisha had changed. She wasn't just waiting anymore. She was understanding. She sat beside him, holding his hand, and whispered the words she had written in her heart for months. "Hamza, I found your message. I know what you wanted to say. You don't need to wake up to prove your love. You already did." And then something happened. A slight movement, a twitch of his fingers. Her heart raced. The monitors beeped faster, steady, alive. His eyes fluttered open for the briefest moment, his lips forming a single word, her name. "Aisha." The world froze. She gasped, gripping his hand tightly. Tears of joy and disbelief streamed down her face. But before she could speak, his hand fell still again. The monitor steadied. The doctors rushed in, their voices echoing through the room. But Aisha heard nothing. She just sat there, smiling through her tears, whispering, "You kept your promise. You said my name one last time." That night, as she left the hospital, the rain had stopped. The sky was clear, and the stars shimmered softly, like distant souls watching over her. She looked up and smiled. "You didn't send the message, Hamza," she said softly, "but I received it. I'll keep it forever." The story of Aisha and Hamza didn't end with a goodbye. It lingered in the space between words, in the quiet after the rain, in a message never sent but always understood. Because love, real love, doesn't need delivery. It only needs remembrance. The morning after Hamza whispered her name, the world around Aisha felt strangely lighter, as if the clouds that had lived inside her heart for months had finally begun to part. The doctors called it a neurological reflex, but Aisha called it love, love strong enough to break through even the deepest silence. She sat by his bed, holding his hand with both of hers, whispering softly as though each word might find its way into his dreams. "Hamza," she said, her voice trembling but hopeful, "I heard you." I'll never forget that moment. The machines hummed quietly, their rhythmic beeps like distant heartbeats of faith. For the first time in months, she felt a new kind of warmth, not the warmth of his touch, but of his presence still living in the room. It was as if his soul refused to leave, bound by a promise they had made when life still felt infinite. As she looked at him, she remembered their favorite quote, one Hamza had written in his journal, asterisk, "Some loves don't end, they just change their form." Asterisk. Aisha decided she would no longer just wait for Hamza to wake up. She would start living for him, carrying his words, his dreams, his heart, as if he were still walking beside her. She began spending her days sketching again, the same way she used to when Hamza would sit behind her, teasing her about the crooked lines. At first, her drawings were full of pain, dark colors, empty skies, shadows. But slowly, soft hues returned. Sunlight found its way back onto her canvas. Weeks passed. Every morning, she came to the hospital with her sketchbook. She would sit near the window, talk to Hamza, and draw. The nurses had grown used to her presence. Her quiet faith had become part of the hospital's rhythm. One afternoon, while she was sketching the view outside, an old man in the next bed smiled and said, "You paint like you're waiting for someone to see it." Aisha smiled faintly. "I am. And he will someday." That evening, while she was rearranging Hamza's things, the phone he once owned slipped from the drawer. It glowed faintly, that same phone which had carried his unsent message. For some reason, she felt drawn to open it again. Scrolling through his notes, she found something she hadn't seen before, a folder named Dream Letters. Inside were voice memos, short recordings saved just days before his accident. Her heart began to race as she pressed play. Hamza's voice filled the room, soft, warm, alive. "Aisha," he said with a smile she could hear, "you always said I talk too much, but if I ever go silent one day, I want my voice to stay somewhere near you." She froze, tears welling in her eyes. Another recording began. Sometimes I wonder if souls can speak when words stop. If they can, mine will only ever say your name. Aisha couldn't hold back anymore. She pressed the phone to her heart, whispering through her sobs, "You're still speaking to me, Hamza, even from your silence." As she listened to the last memo, she heard him laugh softly before saying, "And if I ever go before you, don't grieve too long. Turn every pain into art, every tear into a brushstroke, every silence into a story. That's how I'll live through you." Those words didn't just break her. They rebuilt her. That night, she didn't cry. She stayed awake until dawn, sketching Hamza's smile, every curve, every shadow, until it felt like he was looking back at her. Days turned into weeks again, and soon, Aisha's art began attracting attention. One of the doctors, noticing her work, asked if she would display her paintings in the hospital's art wing. Hesitant at first, she finally agreed, saying, "If it gives someone else hope, it's worth it." On the day of the exhibition, the hall was filled with people, patients, doctors, and visitors. Every painting told a piece of her story, one of pain, love, patience, and quiet faith. But the final painting, the one she unveiled last, left everyone silent. It was a portrait of Hamza, not as he was lying in the hospital, but as he used to be, smiling, holding an umbrella over her in the rain. Beneath it, she had written the words from his last draft message, asterisk, "Even in my silence, I am still saying your name." Asterisk. The audience stood still, some with tears in their eyes. For Aisha, that moment wasn't about applause. It was about completion. Later that evening, when the hall emptied and the lights dimmed, Aisha returned to Hamza's room. She placed a small framed copy of his portrait beside him and whispered, "You're part of the world again, Hamza. Your voice, your smile, your love, they're all alive out there." She kissed his forehead gently and added, "You said love changes its form. Maybe this is what you meant." As she sat quietly, she noticed something she couldn't explain, a soft movement in his hand, like the faintest flicker of response. Her heart skipped a beat. The doctors came, ran their tests, but they found no new signs of change. Still, Aisha smiled. She didn't need proof. She believed that somewhere within his dreams, Hamza had seen her painting and smiled back. That night, she stepped outside the hospital and looked up at the sky. It was raining again, soft, gentle rain, just like the night they first met. She walked out into it, closing her eyes, arms open, letting the drops touch her face. "I can feel you in this," she whispered. "Every drop is your heartbeat, isn't it?" A quiet breeze passed through the hospital garden, carrying the faint scent of jasmine, Hamza's favorite flower. And in that moment, Aisha didn't feel alone anymore. The rain wasn't just falling, it was speaking. It was him, reminding her that some messages are never lost. They just find new ways to reach us. Aisha went home that night and placed Hamza's phone in her art studio, next to her brushes and paints. She opened a new canvas and wrote at the top, "The last message." But this time, it wasn't about loss. It was about rebirth, of love, of faith, of hope. As her hands moved across the canvas, she realized Hamza had never truly left. He had simply become everything that inspired her. By dawn, her painting was finished, a scene of two souls walking together through the rain, one visible, one made of light. Beneath it, she wrote the words that had become her truth. Asterisk, some messages are never sent, because they never need to be. The heart already knows. Asterisk, and somewhere, beyond the veil of life and death, Hamza smiled, because his message had finally reached her. Not through the phone, not through words, but through love that refused to fade. The rain had stopped, but Aisha's world was still painted in the shades of memory. It had been 6 months since that night when Hamza had whispered her name and drifted back into his endless sleep. 6 months of quiet mornings, empty hospital chairs, and letters she never sent. Yet, in all that silence, she had found something extraordinary: peace. The pain had not disappeared, It had simply learned to breathe beside her. Every time she painted, every time the first drop of rain touched her window, she felt Hamza's presence, gentle, invisible, but unmistakably there. Aisha had now become a name known to many. Her art, a blend of sadness and light, had touched thousands. People wrote to her, saying her paintings healed something in them, that her brush carried the voice of a love that refused to die. But she never took credit for any of it. Whenever someone asked where her inspiration came from, she would simply smile and say, "It came from a message that was never sent." One day, she received an invitation from a major art gallery in the city. They wanted to host her first solo exhibition, a showcase of her journey through loss and love. The event was called Echoes of the Unsent. Aisha accepted, feeling as though destiny had been quietly guiding her toward this moment. The preparations began, and she poured her heart into every detail: the lighting, the arrangement, even the background music that softly played the sound of rain. On the evening of the exhibition, the gallery glowed under golden lights. People from all walks of life filled the hall: writers, artists, and strangers who had once found comfort in her work. At the center of the exhibition stood her masterpiece, the final painting she had created, titled The Last Message. It showed two figures standing under one umbrella, the rain forming invisible threads that connected their hearts across time. Underneath, a simple inscription read, "Some words never need to be spoken. The soul already knows." As she stood there, watching people move to tears by her art, a quiet breeze brushed against her face. Though they were indoors, she could swear she smelled rain. She closed her eyes for a moment and whispered, "You're here, aren't you?" And for a heartbeat, she felt a warmth against her palm, just like the day he used to hold her hand. When she opened her eyes again, she noticed a young boy staring at the painting, tears glistening in his eyes. He turned to her and said, "Miss, this feels like something I've lost too." Aisha knelt beside him and replied softly, "Maybe it's not lost. Maybe it's just waiting to be found again, in a different form." That night, after everyone had left and the lights dimmed, Aisha stayed behind. The silence of the gallery wrapped around her like a familiar blanket. She walked slowly toward her painting, stopping just before it. "We did it, Hamza," she whispered. "Your words, they're alive now. You said you wanted to stay near me, and you did." Her voice trembled, not with sadness, but with peace. She reached into her bag and took out Hamza's old phone, its screen cracked, its memory full of his messages and voice notes. She placed it gently beside the painting, like an offering, a bridge between what was and what remains. Suddenly, a faint chime came from the phone. The screen flickered to life for the first time in months. Her heart raced as she picked it up. A new notification appeared, a voice memo she had never seen before, time-stamped one day before his accident. Trembling, she pressed play. Hamza's voice filled the gallery, soft and familiar. "If you ever hear this, Aisha, promise me one thing. Never let pain silence you. Paint our story so that even if my voice fades, people will still hear it through you." Her knees weakened. She sat on the floor, tears falling freely as Hamza's laughter played faintly in the background of the recording. "I love you," his voice said finally. "Not in this lifetime, but in every lifetime after this one." The recording ended. The silence that followed wasn't empty anymore. It was sacred. Aisha closed her eyes, pressing the phone against her heart. "I promise, Hamza," she whispered. "I'll keep painting. I'll keep speaking for both of us." Months passed after that night. Aisha continued to paint, not out of grief, but out of gratitude. Her life became a living canvas, one that honored Hamza's message. Every year, on the same day as his accident, she visited the hospital garden where they used to sit. She would place a white rose on the bench, sit quietly, and let the wind tell her new stories. And every year, without fail, it would rain. Just softly, just enough for her to look up at the sky and smile. One such evening, as the rain began again, she noticed something different. A little girl holding her mother's hand walked up to her. The girl looked at the rose, then at Aisha and said, "He's here with you, isn't he?" Aisha was taken aback. "Who told you that?" she asked softly. The girl smiled innocently. "He did," she said, pointing toward the empty bench. Aisha froze, her eyes filling with tears. She didn't see anyone there, but she felt it, the same warmth, the same peace. "Yes," she whispered. "He's always here." As the girl left, Aisha took out her notebook, the one Hamza had gifted her years ago, and began to write the final page of their story. Asterisk, love doesn't end with goodbye. It continues in echoes, in art, in the quiet spaces between heartbeats. Some messages are never meant to be sent, because the soul already knows where they belong. Asterisk, she signed it, Aisha and Hamza. When the rain finally stopped, she closed the notebook, stood up, and looked toward the horizon where the sun was breaking through the clouds. Light spilled across the wet earth, turning every drop of rain into gold. In that light, she felt him again, not as a memory, but as presence. The kind that doesn't fade. The kind that becomes one with the world. And somewhere, perhaps beyond the reach of time, Hamza smiled, his words now eternal, his message finally delivered through her. Because love, when it's real, doesn't need to be sent, it simply exists. Always, everywhere, forever.